Hello, everybody. My name is Jelani, and welcome to the 31st, episode of the DeSci Rising series, put on by DeSci World, where our goal here is always to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and generally engage with both the DeSci World and wider DeSci community. Now, the idea behind all this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community leveraging these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we're all looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industries. Now, no more than ever before, in this particular episode, we have a kindred spirit project that is focused on many of the same pillars with which DeSci World holds very much dear. And so in today's episode, I have the great pleasure of speaking with a very, very prolific person in not just the DeSci space, but more so in the average tech space, Keith Comito, who, among many things, including being the lead software or one of the lead software engineers at Disney, as well as a prolific inventor, is also the president of Lifespan.io, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on promoting the advancement of biomedical technologies through responsible journalism, crowdfunding, community building, and education/edutainment. So without further ado, welcome Keith, and thank you for taking the time to help us learn more about yourself, as well as the extensive work that you guys have been doing at Lifespan.io.
Great. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Jelani. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Happy to be here.
This is going to be good. So Keith, perfect way to start. I'm sure you've done a few of these over the past times. I mean, I know Lifespan, you guys have your own YouTube channel, avid speaker. I see you've changed your display picture to the Cointelegraph article that was put out. Really, really cool. So let's start with the grassroots. How did Keith, where do you come from? What led you into this Web3 DeSci space?
Sure. Yeah, great question. There's kind of two vectors of my life that converged onto the Web3 space. So my, original background is, just a kid growing up on Long Island, New York. And, when I went to college, I studied mathematics and computer programming. And around maybe almost like 20 years ago now, I started dipping into like mobile applications. So my first kind of, I guess you could say, more well-known pursuits were back when the iPhone was like first coming out. I made a bunch of silly games and stuff that did well, and that really excited me because unlike at the time, the existing computer programs and stuff like the iPhone App Store at that time, if you're just like the early days in Atari or Commodore 64, if you were like one person, had a cool idea, you can make a game yourself and put it on the store, and that was really exciting. And that led me down various tributations in the tech world. So I invented a lot of technology for different companies. Most recently, as you mentioned, at Disney. And then the other area of my life is about 12 years ago. I read some books that convinced me that aging was a tractable engineering problem. For example, Ending Aging by Aubrey de Grey. I started going to these citizen science laboratories like GenSpace in Brooklyn, New York, which is almost like I realize now, like the earlier, birth of kind of the DeSci movement was in these kind of areas as well. So I realized there's a nice through line there. And from working at those kind of spaces, I met other like-minded people, and we realized that aging was a significant problem. And to your point about grassroots, that one of the needed elements to drive these kinds of fields forward was to really engage the public with like exciting and inspiring initiatives, very similar to what the early cancer research advocates did in the 1940s. And that led to the birth of Lifespan.io. And we did a lot of initiatives to outreach to the public, collaborations with YouTube celebrities, crowdfunding campaigns. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But then to answer your question now specifically, over the last 4 or 5 years, as you can imagine, both of these areas are converging into blockchain technology as in addition to just creating new exciting models for rallying communities like the DeSci World community that we're on right now, crowdfunding, but also in how the infrastructure of blockchain technology can really help solve some systemic healthcare data issues. So it's all coming together. My various jobs hopefully will become one job at some point soon. So maybe that I can sleep, which is good for longevity. So I got to get better about that. So hopefully that was a good lead into whatever you would like to talk about, Jelani.
Yeah, for sure. That was fantastic. Actually, you highlight a lot of points that I think are very important. So in our previous episode, we had Allison from Foresight Institute, and Foresight has been around for a good chunk of time. It sounds like lifespan. At least you're delving into this whole community geared approach to solving scientific issues or scientific conundrums has also dates back a few decades. And I think that's very important because similar to your statement of like, the early days of the App Store of the iPhone where people could come and create these apps, it kind of opened up this open source or at least easily accessible framework for people to try, test new things and bring forth, cool ideas and cool apps. It's very similar to how I view the DeSci space, right? It's very new. The barriers of entry are extremely low, and so people are just trying stuff, right? They're trying shit, they're breaking stuff, they're making crazy mistakes. Hopefully, not too many mistakes. But it's like we're at that early stage of like high entropy where there's a lot of great innovation that I think is going to come out. And I think having people that have experienced these kind of waves of innovation from a societal standpoint are really important to have because you guys might be able to help, shed light and steer, or at least guide where this space is going so you can avoid some of the pitfalls that have existed in previous iterations of these kind of things. And that's definitely something that I want to get into with you a little bit later on. Um, but I guess, leading since we kind of gave the lead up to you, what was the genesis point of lifespan.io, and can you give us kind of a short or even a lengthy one, an overview of the lifespan.io actual platform and what you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that the true birth of Lifespan.io happens around 2014, maybe officially 2013, but then we sort of became public in 2014. And it was basically, as mentioned, this cluster of people that was kind of centered around GenSpace, as mentioned, the Brooklyn Citizen Science Lab. And one of the key factors to this was one of the people who co-founded GenSpace. His name is Dr. Oliver Medvedik. Anyone who's familiar with Lifespan.io might recognize him from running our journal clubs, our live stream journal clubs, where we walk through papers. And Oliver used to work in David Sinclair's lab back in like the early days of like the resveratrol, where red wine is good for you, all that kind of stuff. So he was obviously interested in aging. I was interested in aging, and that sort of created like a magnetism that drew the other people in the area, like the local NYC area, to start to have like I remember in the early days we were just kind of having like ad hoc meetings in like Just Salad or like places like this in the city. So very kind of like uh, Jobs and Wozniak garage kind of style, in like Brooklyn coffee shops, just random meetings. Um, and then, as mentioned, that kind of codified into a core group of say like 8 to 10 people. And then we sat down and were like, well, what is the most useful thing that we can do if we started another 501c3? Like one of the questions was like, do we just want to be the New York arm of like an organization that already exists out there, like SENS or something like that? Do we want to do our own thing? Is research the most important thing that we could do, etc.? And basically, based on the skill sets of who is president and some thoughts, what we centered on is that rather than being a wing of another organization, we wanted to sort of be, I guess you could say, like non-denominational. We just wanted to support the field without getting married to any specific framework of how people were currently understanding aging. Where just basically our criteria is like, is the project scientifically sound? Does it address the core drivers of aging? Is it something that we think the public can get inspired about? And then what we decided to do with that at the early days of Lifespan.io, we initially were just a crowdfunding campaign, which again is kind of early, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, like early DeSci again, without having that umbrella yet. Um, because at that time, this is right around when like Kickstarter and Indiegogo were first really getting off the ground and doing well. But we noticed, and you can still validate this. There's actually a paper that I wrote for, I think, Cold Spring Harbor. If you search for my name and search for like crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and aging research, you'll find like this paper that I wrote on like the history of crowdfunding from like the beginning of time until now. And when I get to the part about talking about like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, etc., it was very apparent that like scientific projects were very underfunded compared to other projects, probably because most researchers aren't like super up on like making a flashy video and like all this kind of stuff, right? And there was a lot of diffusion, right? So maybe you might have someone putting like a really important research project and then it raised like $2,000. So we figured at the time that it would make sense to like semi-centralize the I know it's maybe a bad word to use, but like the lifespan related crowdfunding under one platform, so we could build up this community of people that would be specifically engaged in that, etc. And we launched a good number of crowdfunding campaigns that, you know, from then to now, I think we raised almost $1 million from just like grassroots crowdfunding, which isn't a lot in terms of government funding, but it is a lot in terms of getting proof of concept studies. So it was very valuable. And then to now more fully answer your question, that was the early days. But then as our community started to grow, we transitioned into full on ecosystem building. And that includes right now running one of the most trafficked news outlets on the subject of aging research, running various YouTube channels, including one that has over 3 million subscribers, Life Noggin, doing collaborations with celebrities, doing, working with government agencies, writing letters to the World Health Organization to have, certain aspects of policies changed. Although obviously, as a 501c3, there's only limited things that we can do with politics. But that actually dovetails to another area of our work, which is helping to birth other organizations in the field that can do other things. So, for example, the 501c4 organization, the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, that is able to do those political things. We help with the creation of that and work together with that. And I think, Jelani, you'll find that that's very much in the spirit of what you're trying to do with DeSci World, or the conversations that we've had together, is instead of every organization trying to do everything, it is much smarter to just identify what are the two or three things that you are great at, and find friends who are doing two or three other things that they're great at, and find out how to interoperate in like this mesh network where the sum can become much greater than the parts. And we could talk about more of like the tactics of how a field does that and the learnings from the earlier you know cycles of this kind of stuff, like you mentioned earlier.
Voltron. People have heard me say it. They've heard me say it multiple times through many different spaces that I'm a part of. Voltron, exactly. I completely agree. That is
Do
definitely the
you,
tactic that we're
John,
taking.
Johnny,
Yeah.
do you remember who the Black Lion pilot is?
I don't remember who the Black Lion Pilot of Voltron is.
It's Keith. You form the
Awesome.
arms and the legs, and I'll form the head.
Exactly. There we go. Um, so for those of you who don't know, Keith and I do have semi, frequent nerd out conversations every once in a while in our different initiatives that we overlap on. So, excuse us for that. But no, I completely agree. DeSci World is the more I've come to learn about what Lifespan has done, and looking at a lot of other opportunities, a lot of other incumbents in both the open science movement and just in general around a lot of the pillars with which we base ourselves off of, we're taking key points and key advice points from these periods because it's the same thing. We're focused on, you can't do everything, especially in something as wide as open science slash DeSci. We're taking it upon ourselves to hopefully be that social engagement wing, similar to what Lifespan is doing, but agnostic of the actual niche, and just broker these kind of conversations to facilitate more participants, keyed and specialized participants that can take on other more, specific tasks, whether it be crowdsourced funding through the bio DAOs or infrastructure, open source infrastructure like DeSci Labs and the things, tooling that they're coming up with, lateral foresight with their tech trees, space with MoonDAO and the other of the D Space collectives, just really coming together as a communal space to do that. And it's interesting because what we noticed is, and I think what the success of crowdsourced funding, what that indicates to me is the reason that that wasn't the case before is that there is a messaging block. It's a cognition block really that exists because there are a lot of people that exist in this world that are willing to contribute, that want to contribute, and it's just they don't know where to contribute. Do you find it that it was the same thing for the lifespan in the life extension space? People just weren't aware, and in being able to provide them with edutainment, education, journalism, and all these kind of pillars, it's helped orient them better.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great question and framing there, and I think it's a good one to bring up because I believe there's been a lot of positive movement here in the past 5 or 10 years, in particular with regards to life extension. So obviously, everything is all connected, and it's easy to silo not just the research, but just to silo how you look at a field. So like there's the investment ecosystem, there's the research itself, there's the propensity for government funding, there's the crowd sentiment, etc. And it's easy for, if you're a professional working in the field or someone outside, to just kind of almost bury yourself in one area of this without realizing how truly interconnected this all is. So to give you just one example of, like, again, I don't want to take Lifespan doesn't want to take singular credit for like this shift. This is something that's like a, all hands on deck, everybody's doing it together in pieces that are seen and unseen kind of thing. But compared to 10 years ago, let's say, the public sentiment and the researcher willing that they're working on aging research is definitely different, and that creates much more inroads. So one clear example of this, and I think we've talked about this before, Jelani, is a video series that we did with the YouTube channel Kors Gesagt, which isn't one of our own channels like Life Noggin, but one that we collaborate with. And I believe much of the audience here on DeSci World has probably seen these videos. There's a two-parter that came out in 2017. I think they're called like End Aging and Cure Aging. And Kors Gesagt does these amazing animations. Probably one of the most well-respected science animation channels on YouTube. And we made this two-part series specifically about aging biology. One of them was more about like what is the current research right now, like senolytics and things like this. And one of them was more like the philosophical, like should we, is this a good thing kind of angle. I'd use like mythology as a lens. And the important thing that happened was when these videos were launched, for like the weekend that they were launched, they were like the top trending videos on the entire internet for like those few days, which is already awesome. But the more important thing was the like to dislike ratio was like 99.997 thumbs up and like just a slew of comments. So I think that
Wow.
really showed, people who were paying attention and were nervous about like how, strident they can be about, are we actually working on aging or do we have to dress it up? There was a little bit of a sea change there where there was a clear proof that as long as you talk about the subjects in a sane manner, that a much larger segment of the public is here for it. And then, as you can imagine, July, this is very similar to what happened with the cancer advocates back in the day when they were doing things like the Jimmy Fund and telethons, early crowdsourcing, early crowdfunding. Is once you build up like a very vocal and, sane sounding cohort of the public that is saying, hey, this is important, that then allows some of the dominoes to fall. Now you can get an audience with your local congressperson and say, have you seen this article in Forbes? This is something we should really talk about here. Look at the budget, it's misaligned. And then that in turn might allow more, ARPA H to get formed, which then allocates a lot more money to research. That everything I just said suddenly makes the landscape more fertile. And if you're seeking investment income, now it doesn't sound crazy to the investors. So, and then if you're a researcher working on something else, and maybe you dreamed about working on aging, but you didn't think it was feasible, well, now you're like, maybe maybe I should get involved in that field. Maybe I should transfer my knowledge to that field. And that is exactly, to tie it all back now, Jelani, what is happening now with the intersection of blockchain technology and life extension research, because there's that confluence all the way back to Hal Finney, who many people think was Satoshi, all the way through pioneers of the president like, Juan Benet and Stefan George and Vitalik Buterin. There's this confluence of people who are passionate about blockchain technology and life extension technology. And I think it's this idea of transcending boundaries, be it financial or biological. But no, to cap off the answer is that hopefully now it's clear how all of these elements are co burgeoning together. And this is why it matters to do outreach initiatives, to do community building like DeSci World is doing for DeSci, what Lifespan is doing for DeSci and Life Extension, because it has all of these untracked or unmeasurable thus far, maybe blockchain will help with that, knock-on effects to make the landscape fertile and to really accelerate things, even if you can't quite quantify it. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. And they kind of go hand in hand, right? I would consider kind of offhandy that life extension is more of a, I wouldn't say esoteric, but it's closer to the fringe of the scientific realm than, let's say, the core of it, even though it's an extremely important thing to consider. So it makes kind of sense that some of the initial scientific endeavors or people who are dibbling and dabbling with the life extension are also much more open-minded in terms of what can happen in the future. and therefore probably more amenable to taking on the concept of, okay, blockchain technology and leveraging it, and just leveraging a variety of different tech stacks that are atypical to traditional scientists. But even within that, have you experienced this similar, or have you experienced a level of hesitancy in bridging these two gaps of lifespan extension and then what the Web3 society community has to offer, both from the technical perspective but also the cultural perspective?
Good question. Yeah, I would say that I don't think I experience hesitancy. It's more like a challenge that the community has to solve to get this tent to become wider. Because, for example, if you're talking about like blockchain technology, serving decentralized science, serving life extension technology, now you've kind of done a Venn diagram of like niche upon niche. So now it's doubly harder that if you're going to reach out to like like a totally normal person on the street and try to get them involved in that, now you have like a lot of education work to do, because like what if they don't even know what a wallet is, and you got to explain like that before you can even explain blockchain technology. If they're not even familiar with like certain kinds of biotechnology research, then you have to explain that. Then you have to explain why aging is tactically important. And I think we can do that. So I guess I would say I don't see hesitancy from the inside of the community. I see a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of people running out there and doing things. But the challenge, as it always is how do we shift the Overton window? How do we widen the tent? How do we refine our message? And there is a lot of conversation about that. So as an example, Lifespan works closely with VitaDAO, right? I'm sure many of the audience here is familiar with VitaDAO, and I was part of one of the founding working groups there. And this is something VitaDAO is figuring out as well. How do they expand their group of token holders? Because now they're just not trying to appeal to regular crypto people or degens. They're trying to appeal to ideologically aligned crypto people who care about life extension. So that narrows your initial target pool, right? So how do we do initiatives? So we're working with VitaDAO right now. It should, I believe, launch in like a week and a half. We're going to be doing like a 2-part series on the Life Noggin YouTube channel. That's kind of like a funnel into getting people interested in down this rabbit hole. So there's a lot of work to be done, but hopefully I answered your question. I don't get hesitancy from the inside. There's just challenges that are external that the passionate community is working together to solve. One challenge that you just made me think of that I do want to present is there is a not a crisis, but like an issue of sense making when a field is emerging like this, especially if you have 2 or 3 co-present emerging fields. And there's a tendency for, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. Hopefully that's okay. If anyone's read, Socrates, Plato, and the idea of the philosopher king, right? The idea here that makes it challenging is that Plato and Socrates were wondering if it would like that the best model of government might be some autocratic system where the king happens to be awesome and happens to be a philosopher, right? Like, wouldn't that be great? Because then you have centralized power, but the person actually knows what they're doing. And then there were some experiments in trying to make this happen, trying to find someone. And long story short, at the end of the road, they're like, this doesn't work. Because and here's the key part that will be relevant, if you have the qualities of character that would make you an amazing king or queen, you necessarily do not have the characteristics that would enable you to become the king or the queen. Just like in politicking and all this kind of stuff and being corrupted, right? So there's like a challenge, like, oh, this is like how do we can't really do this. And there's an issue that's analogous to that when fields are at the stage that they are with like blockchain technology and life extension. So like, SBF is sort of an example of this, right? It's like you have these people that are amazingly skilled at attracting attention from funding sources and spinning the good yarn and, painting the vision, but they're not actually really doing the thing or building it, right? Rolling up the sleeves. So there's a danger in being too kumbaya and too like, oh yeah, this is a great vision, but like at some point work actually needs to get done. So there needs to be models of sense making that emerge within the field, that in blockchain technology can very much help with this by validating impact, all these kind of things. There's a lot of projects. That is a very important area here, is how can people who are coming in who are potentially large funders or even just passionate people with skills that want to help, how do they find the real stuff to get involved in where they're going to have a maximal impact? And that's, I think, a challenge. So maybe I pivoted your question slightly to something that I see as like something we need to solve. Is that on target, Jelani?
No, that is on target. It's a little bit of a pivot, but it's a pivot in the direction that is actually very interesting and something that I'd like to explore. So, this is going to kind of, and we will circle back into a little bit more about what lifespan is doing. But since we're on a philosophical tip, a great article was released today by one of our resident core team members, Carol, in conjunction with Jonathan Starr from the Science Commons Initiative, Martin, and a few others, and Eric Van Winkle from DeSci Labs, and a few others in the space that are looking to kind of really wrote this up and showing how DeSci provides validity to, or more validity, impact, and pragmatic utility validity to the wider Web3 space, right? And it's kind of that thing similar to what you were talking about. There needs to be this kind of sense making in Web3 that there's more here than just JPEGs and the capacity to transfer funds for whatever reason, right? Just the basic capacity to transfer funds. That should culminate into something that is worthwhile, or else the technology itself is a lot less worthwhile, right? Now I say DeSci, I see DeSci and refi and more of these impact-driven initiatives or spaces, whatever you want to call them, as finally starting to provide that validity to, yeah, Web3 is a thing and it has real impact capacity. Now, internal to ourselves, I see the fruition of technologies, whether it be the success of VitaDAO's crowdsourcing and eventual funding of actual therapies in longevity, or the tooling, the DeSci nodes, laterals, a lot of the members that I spoke about previously, the fruition of the maturation of these tools, I think, is one of the I guess characteristics or events that is going to provide that sense making for DeSci. Are there other? Do you agree or disagree, or are there other things? And are there other things that are also need to come online for that to also be the case?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I do think that there are other things that also need to come online. And I'll just talk about one idea that's emerging, and there's some kind of shots on goal there, like hypercerts, which is this idea of like retroactive funding, right? Of later, going back and saying who actually built the thing that was like super valuable to society, and then going back and rewarding those people so that they can continue doing very similar to almost what the MacArthur grants do. If everyone here is familiar with the MacArthur grants, this is like, there's like this council somewhere that just goes, that person is a genius. They did something amazing. Like, here's $1 million, like to support your work. Just go. Like, no strings attached. It's just like an airdrop of like, you did good. Keep doing good. Here you go. We're going to support you so you can like eat while you're doing the good thing. And just to give you an example of why things like this, and we don't have to talk about it at detail, but I'm working on a couple of like regenerative funding models that will have some of these elements myself, using different versions of quadratic funding and different versions of like dynamic NFTs that track your good works on chain, which I'm calling a proof of philanthropy. You'll learn more about that when you check out the grant rounds later. But where it's helpful is what happens in the tech world and also in the academic world is, unfortunately, people have, you can't help having some level of like selfish motivations, and like, oh well, I got to keep this close to the chest because I don't want to get scooped. I want to be the one who like who had the idea first, right? So I'm going to not collaborate with others. I'm going to keep it on the down low and then try to publish before that other lab does, right? Same kind of thing in the tech world with like patented technology and stuff, right? But I personally prefer to, just like Vitalik does with his like blog or Substack or whatever, is to build in public, because we can't do everything ourselves. If I have an idea for a COVID detector or something like that, if I put it out into the world, well, maybe we solve the next pandemic. And if I kept that idea to myself, people literally will die, right? So if you can create these models that make inventors, make researchers go, hey, you know what? If I just take a flyer on this and I just publish this in an open source journal and say, I'm not going to worry about if someone tries to steal my idea or scoop me or whatever, because the world will see the provenance of the ideas. And if there are these mechanisms, if I really just care about being known as the person who came up with the idea, well, it'll be tracked on chain. and everyone will still know that, that idea came from me. So that I think if we have mechanisms like this, it will unlock a lot more academics, a lot more inventors to start building in public, which I think is very important.
No, I absolutely agree, right? The ability to have, trustless tracking of who did what means as a scientist, I remember, you're publishing, you're writing a manuscript, and you're almost like, oh shit, I really hope I don't get scooped. Like that would really suck, right? So you're not very open, you're not very necessarily forthcoming, even with the community that you're a part of, like the wider, broader community that you're a part of, because you're to a certain extent you're worried. But if things are recorded as early as when they're, once if we have these, for example, on-chain hardware. So when I run a PCR, it's there, right? It's on-chain forever. And you can have this kind of chronological timestamp from as soon as you have it done. Then you can argue that, like, even if they published before me, I've been working on this as well. And there's value to that. So bringing science more away from the chest, I agree with you. I think the other thing is, and you guys touch upon this, especially with your work with I mean, you know, your work with VitaDAO and the longevity project is something I'd like to get into right after this. In providing alternative sources of funding for scientists such that they have that breath, they can take that breath and not be like, oh, I really need to be first on this, or else I'm not eating tomorrow, or I'm not going to be able to sustain my career for like the next 2 years, right? Like that it's a really, really science is such a stressful thing in and of itself, and then layering on these social engineering of lack of resources is kind of just makes it exponential. I can understand the burnout. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Hopefully these new technologies, these novel frameworks, and also the cultural shift that you ourselves, other participants in the space. I see Victor here from Crypto Youth doing a lot of similar work in Africa. That social shift that is going to come alongside that is extremely necessary, because it's really the application of the tech that is going to change it. Um, but before we continue with these different pivots, I'd love to get into the longevity prize. So, Lifespan.io, going through your website, which I suggest highly everybody to do so. You guys have a lot of partners that you seem to be working with. Your advisory board your advisory board is like a rock star board of scientists. George Church, Aubrey de Grey. It's like you guys have pulled in all the longevity and like the really open-minded scientific rock stars as your advisory board. And so, can we talk a little bit about this life longevity prize that you guys put together?
Sure. Yeah. No, this was an excellent prize that was co-initiated with the Methuselah Foundation, with Foresight, with VitaDAO, and kind of the purpose here was to solicit hypotheses for experiments that were kind of like undervalued or not being explored through the current mechanisms, so a little bit more moonshot kind of ideas. And to the earlier conversation, this was actually really a fantastic experience because there was a variety of projects that were submitted, that I was one of the judges, kind of voting on it. But a lot of the proposal ideas were really great. And I'll just speak a little bit about, the one that I remember most and why I was excited by it, and it'll dovetail into the earlier conversation of almost like retroactive things. So what the project that won the first place prize was all about embryogenesis and tracking damage. I don't want to get too into the details here if the audience is not super savvy, but long story short, things that I find most interesting from the aging research side that is somewhat, underlooked at is that the mystery to me is not that we age or why we age, physics and entropy and all that, your car your car will age, right? The mystery is if you have a 40-year-old man and a 30-year-old woman and they conceive, why is the baby young? Like, why are we born young? There's got to be something that reverses the damage or protects the damage that happens through the process of, procreating. So the project that won the longevity prize, the first place prize, is trying to track different damage factors sort of through, like, uh, sex cells all the way through embryogenesis and then into like cellular division and, becoming an embryo and a baby. And the reason why I'm speaking about this is now that I say that out loud, you probably think to yourself, yeah, like that's like a really obvious area to look at, like super important, super fundamental, to the whole question of aging. But this is an area that has been somewhat comparatively underlooked at compared to the downstream things like, cancer or something like that, right? So this is an area where these kind of projects can come together and create sense making, where you have the organizations that I mentioned, judges with great scientists, and then because it's got this air of like, hey, this is a prize where we're explicitly trying to fund things that are a little bit off the beaten path. Now you have all your George Churches of the world that might be kind of like, in addition to like a college student, there was a great cross section of people that were submitting to this prize. There was people at sort of like the student level and people who were at like, almost the George Church level, right? And then they're comfortable. Yeah, there you go. Carlos Garcia's prize. That's the one I'm talking about. Um, comfortable submitting an idea that might be like not suitable, or what researchers might think is not suitable to submit to the NIH because it might sound a little bit too out there. And then it creates this dialogue. And now to bring that conversation full circle, I just had a conversation with Carlos yesterday because Oliver and I at GenSpace, to bring the story full circle, like 10 years ago, we're wireframing a bunch of ideas for interesting experiments that could be done, looking at how damage is sequestered when a stem cell births off a daughter cell. If damage stays in the mother or stays in the child or is evenly dispersed, is that different in sex cells versus somatic cells when you're an adult? This might be central to the question of damage reversal here. So the point is, we reached out to Carlos, and like these ideas that Oliver and I had 10 years ago that we didn't have time to pursue ourselves because of this prize, I reached out to Carlos and said, hey, we have some learnings that we had from like 10 years ago. Is this interesting to you? And, long story short, it was interesting. So now we're retroactively able to recover some of that lost brain power to put to a project that's currently in flight because of projects like the Hypothesis Prize. So this is just one example of how this could be really interesting to do this kind of crowdsourced fundraising, this crowdsourced ideating, and allowing people to iterate on ideas. Because that's another benefit that I realized that we didn't mention before in the previous conversation, Jelani, that if you feel that you don't need to hide things until they're quote unquote finished, you're able to put the ideas out into the ether like right as you have them and start jamming and cross collaborating and probably move the whole thing along much faster, right?
This is exactly it, right? First of all, that was a fantastic story. Congratulations to Carlos Galicia. It's great to hear that it did exactly that. Pull these strings of these experiments that you guys wireframed back in the day, and that's going to bear fruit into hopefully something that is truly impactful. At least nudges the needle along in the direction of what the longevity and lifespan, life extension folks are looking at. That is fantastic, and is proof of principle of the importance of exactly what you were talking about: the ability to iterate, the ability to crowdsource, the ability to get the message out there. It's so interesting because open source software, right? So the open sourcing of all this, GitHub, has really been the template of like, yeah, that really worked. That it caused the Cambrian explosion of software and SaaSes and all these kind of things. And yet science has been so stagnant out of all the industries. For that industry to be extremely stagnant is, if you really think about it, in the next 10, 20 years, when people look back and are like, what the fuck happened? It's almost 20, it's hindsight 20 is going to kick in like, well, you guys are stupid or what was going on here? And so I have a question, more of a philosophical question, but as somebody who's been a part of, a variety of fields, what do you think has fueled this siloing and closing out and the opposite of the crowdsource and what we're trying to do? What is it? What is actually the crux of that is fueling that?
Great question. And I have some updates that I think will be galvanizing to the audience as I get into this. So basically, I don't mean this in a mean way, but whoever had that phrase that's like, don't attribute to malice what you first can attribute to incompetence is like a great quote. And I don't mean incompetence in this case. What I mean is, I don't think it's intentional, this silo. It's just something that has arisen out of as an emergent property of literally like the existing infrastructure that existed before, right? Because, you just have these different departments that were created uh, sometimes within companies or within government organizations that like, oh, we have a cancer problem, so let's create the Cancer Institute. And okay, great, you're over there, right? And then years later, it was like, okay, we have an Alzheimer's problem. Like, all right, Alzheimer's division over there, right? So it's just almost like a natural outcome of the way things were set up, kind of piecemeal at a time, disjointed, dealing with things one at a time. But now, and with the benefit of increasing technology, hopefully we can now iterate faster. But if you now, and this is also the story of aging as well. Now we can look back with our modern technology, with the learnings that we have now. Not that it's complete, but we can look at it from a bird's eye view and go, wait a minute. National Cancer Institute, you're funding end stage cancer research, but Division of Aging Biology and the NIA, you're working on genetic instability. Well, if you solve genetic instability, is that not going to help solve all cancers? So maybe we need to retool this budget. But now we have to go through the process of like retooling that architecture, just like anything, you get inertia, like, the system kind of knows how it operates. If you kind of come in from left field and say, hey guys, let's just like knock all this shit down and like rebuild it into a DeSci system, there's going to be a good percentage of people who go, whoa, hold on. Like I'm barely able to like get my Zoom call working here. Like what are we talking about? Right. So the main point I wanted to make here is I don't think it's intent. The siloing is usually intentional, with the exception of the person level siloing that we were talking about, of like not wanting to be scooped and that kind of stuff. So the bottom line here, and the positive note, is that I don't think it's a quality of the people, it's a quality of the system. So if we just design a better system, the people within it will function more optimally. And the positive story that I want to tell is I was actually just in DC. I just flew back last night. You know, talking with various different agencies, etc. And I was actually blown away by the excitement for decentralized science. And people swarming me, asking me like, some potential big things might be able to follow up from that. I don't want to tease anything or say anything out of turn. But long story short is this: anytime I talk to an actual human being who's like at a high level of a different healthcare agency or something like that, to a person, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. You have to do this stuff because we want to, but we're kind of stuck in this calcified system. But if you basically embarrass us by showing us a better way, then the system can change. So I'm actually very optimistic that a large scale shift towards decentralized science models can happen shockingly quickly if we can just demonstrate like one or two amazingly like undeniable use cases. And I don't want to shill my project too much, Jelani, but maybe if you like, I could talk a little bit about the Alzheimer's work and how it fits into that story that I just told you, and how it also relates to the earlier question you had of like learnings from previous cycles of technology.
Yes, please. So I was going to ask a few questions, but I didn't know, me and you talk, offline, so that's different. But I didn't know what you could and couldn't share. But please go into what you can share. I'm sure the rest of the community and the listeners are going to enjoy it as much as I usually do.
Sure. So I'll start with sort of the tactical question in the learnings from the previous iterations of technology development. So a story that I tell sometimes in my talks is how the internet came out of the ARPANET, right? And like what it took to get there. And that was like a very like decentralized but organized effort of like basically everyone coming together in like a council. And it's like, all right, everyone, we want to build the internet. Like, we're not leaving this room for like 20 days until we agree on like an overall scaffold, what the goals are, and then we can go, all right, Jimmy, you're working on this part, Sandy, you're working on this part. We get TCP/IP, we get HTTPS, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this agreement on what the goal is, what the metrics are, and how to decentralize the work, and then let's go, right? And that's what we need to do to really accelerate the pace of life extension research, of DeSci, and everything. And by that, I mean, you have to be able to look at the field as if you're a military commander playing a game of Risk or whatever, and going, what are the projects that have like an outsized effect if successful? And what is that? How does that relate to their effort and their cost benefit ratios? So again, not to overly show my own project, but this is why one of the grants that will come up is centered on this decentralized trial for non-drug interventions for Alzheimer's disease. You'll see this as like Stop Alzheimer's with Light and Sound or whatever. And the reason why this fits what I was just saying is that it is Alzheimer's itself is unique in that it's a clearly discrete disease that has its like patient advocacy organizations and people understand it as a disease. It doesn't have the vagueness issues of like, do we need to call aging a disease to work on it, etc. Right? Everybody knows Alzheimer's is a disease. everybody wants it solved. But it's also the one disease that is inextricably bound to aging in a way that other diseases, even cancer or not cancer, can affect kids. I don't think there are many kids with Alzheimer's disease, right? Even though there is early onset and middle age. So the point is, it's tactically important, sort of philosophically, that a lot of people I talk to that might be incredulous about aging research, one of the first things they might say is, come on, you guys are really working on aging? We can't even touch Alzheimer's disease. Look what it did to my mother, right? Where if we suddenly put a dent in Alzheimer's disease, I think that'll subconsciously let everyone know, oh shit, we're in the game here. Like this is now serious, right? So that's kind of the spiritual, philosophical angle, right? But then on the tactical angle, in terms of technology, the therapy I mentioned is digital, just like diagnostics for Alzheimer's disease can be digital. This means that there's a potential therapy here that could be deployable from your laptop. So imagine a system where people log in to a DeSci, system where their data, their EEG data is stored or whatever. They're having, privacy preserving way, of course. They're having a therapy applied to them to prevent them from getting Alzheimer's disease, hopefully, while maybe earning some cryptocurrency for that effort. So you can see how this is a massive flip from the current system that where the American taxpayer has spent over $1 trillion over the past 30 years on drug trial after drug trial after drug trial for Alzheimer's with no results. So if this succeeds scientifically, that will be amazing for the thing itself, but more importantly to this conversation. Can you imagine the conversations that would trigger in the halls of power in government if after that $1 trillion in 30 years, if a bunch of decentralized people on the internet with blinking lights and sounds do something that the existing system couldn't do with all those resources for 30 years? That clearly is a demonstration that, oh wow, we need to adopt the models of whatever happened there. So that's why this is my example of saying, like, this is why I'm spending my personal time on that project rather than some other research project. Because if this one is successful, it has an outsized tactical effect for the entire movement. That makes sense?
That makes absolute sense. And obviously, people's expectations being tapered and everything. That is fantastic still, even in and of itself, right? And I completely agree. We have to. It's an uphill battle, admittedly, but I think one of the major benefits that we have is that it lies in that decentralization. It is not one person, one lab, or one small group of people. It is the entire network of participants that come together to strengthen what we're doing. And that those many small pieces amount to a very big, sum, much more than their individual parts. So I'm looking for. I mean, I'm aware of the proposal. But I'm looking forward for others to come online and see what is being built out there. I think this is a fantastic opportunity. Speaking of that kind of proposal, Keith, if people are interested in coming on to help build out, whether it be that project or other initiatives that Lifespan is working on, how does that work? How would they be able to do that?
Absolutely. There's a lot of different vectors, obviously depending on if the hypothetical helper in question is looking to allocate funding or roll up their sleeves and get involved themselves. If you're interested in the project that I just mentioned there, you can go to lifespan.io/mindset to learn more about the project. Obviously, donations, lifespan.io/donate/crypto/support. You can go to all those pages to see more. There'll be a conference in August 10th and 11th to see what's going on in the field, to see what areas that you can get involved in. But the most important thing that I'll say there to answer Jelani is that this work is so important. The field is still so young. And I think what I'm about to say is always true, but it's even more true based on what I just said. No matter what you're good at or what you want to be good at, there is a place for you. Are you great at making a graphic? We need you. Are you great at just sharing stuff on Twitter? We need you. Are you an engineer? Can you do smart contract engineering? We need you. Like, are you good at talking to people in Washington D.C. to get a meeting with a congressman? We need you. Like, whatever you're good at, we need you. So the field, there's not enough hands for the work. So the suggestion that I would have for anybody, and again, feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm on all social medias. You can find me. I'm somehow the only person in the world with my name. I don't know how that happened. So you can find me really easily if you have any questions. But, go to our site, go to lifespan.io. You can see all the different things that we do, the YouTube stuff, the news stuff. Again, if you're a YouTube celebrity or any kind of content creator, if you're a journalist, etc., again, places for you. And try to become part of the community. Discord server, all that common stuff is available. Our Twitter, and yeah, I mean, I guess the most important thing is actually doing the work, or at least lining up the resources. Like, don't get me wrong, I love being on a million different conferences and talking and stuff, but at some point, especially when lives are on the line here, every second someone dies of age-related disease, which means that if you do something personally that somehow moves the needle up on this research by even 1 second, you will save somebody from like a horrific death of Alzheimer's disease or something. I don't mean to be dark, but just to really underline, like, this is serious business, and you don't necessarily have to do a lot. Like I said, that 1 second might be you having a coffee table conversation with someone who just happens to trigger some downstream thing that moves the research up by one day. So I want to say the barrier to entry is very low if you want to help in a very significant way. But if you want to get more deeply involved, visit any of those pages that I had mentioned. And just to circle back on the mindset for 1 second, that's the Alzheimer's Project. I also want to thank, very much in the spirit of what we're talking about here, Jelani. Um, I've been much more comfortable building in public with this project as like a flagship of trying to stretch that muscle to learn how to do this, and the response has been wonderful, both on the scientific side, but also, I'll just shout out a couple here. There's more than I'm going to mention, but organizations in the public goods sphere, Gitcoin itself, Endowment, Angel Protocol, ones on the architecture side like Weave Chain or Ben Gertzel at AGIX, like so many people have come to talk to me and say, "Can we help out the project?" And sometimes that's help right now, and sometimes that's help later. Like, for in Ben Gertzel's case, like, the AI analysis of the EEG data will come later. But it's nice to know that there are people like that have serious skills that are happy to leverage them to a shared goal that will, let's be honest, there is really no self-interest here. Jelani, if you cure Alzheimer's disease, I'm not going to be upset because now my dad does have Alzheimer's disease, right? So if there ever was a field where this is even more important to build in public, it's this one, because there is no self-interest. There is only community interest, because we're all contending with these horrible diseases and we all can stop them together, I believe.
That was a fantastic, fantastic series of comments, Keith. I have literally nothing else to add on top except for definitely do follow up with Keith. Definitely do put in your time, put in your effort. Help where you can. Kick off that 1 second. That'll save thousands upon thousands of people. So please do reach out to Lifespan. Donate your time, your money, your expertise, your commentary, your skills, whether it be speaking like these on podcasts or just sharing, just simply retweeting and sharing and broadcasting and signal boosting the work that is being done, both within lifespan.io, but also the wider decentralized science space is extremely impactful. And I think sometimes we forget how easy it is to spend things, right? We just talked about how it's just knowledge, it's acquisition of knowledge, being cognizant of what exists out there and things that would be really cool. And there are a slew of people who are just, the barrier is so low now. People will flood in if the opportunity presents itself. They're just not aware of it. So, Keith, I'd love to thank you. We never have enough time for these things, but thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing at lifespend.io. From a social perspective, it touches my heart in particular because that's exactly what we're doing. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of the future endeavors that DeSci World is going to be doing is going to be looking to be in, some form of close proximity to Lifespan, at least getting some form of advice on best practices to do so from the wider DeSci space. Um, Normally we have time for questions. We can go over a little bit. Keith, I don't want to take too much time. I know you just flew back. If there is anybody who wants to add comments or ask any questions, please put up a request. I will bring you up. Um, I'll give them a few minutes to do so. Uh, Otherwise, Keith, can you talk about, because you did bring it, or did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say I'm good for a few minutes for questions.
Cool. Yeah. So, well, people seem shy, so I'll ask one question. You did make reference to a conference going on in New York. I know you and I have spoke about this on the back end, but can you provide? Oh, here's Ed. I'll bring him up. Can you provide any insight on that conference briefly before Ed comes on?
Absolutely, yeah. There should be a kind of prototype page up right now. If people go to lifespan.io/conference, more information will be forthcoming. But this conference will be on August 10th and 11th in New York City. We're locking down the specific venue right now. But the thing of relevance here is this will be our sixth annual conference at Lifespan.io. Ending Age Related Diseases is the name of the conference. But new for this year is we're really trying to bring in the world of decentralized science. So we're also calling it like Longevity and DeSci Summit New York City, right? And we're working on what I would really like to see, and it's coming together. And soon you're going to see speaker lists and all that kind of stuff. It might take us a few weeks to kind of finalize that. Um, but I really want this conference to interlace the worlds of biotechnology, life extension research, and blockchain technology, along with what we've done in the past, which is bringing in like regulators and maybe Congress people and journalists and movie producers, like to really create this cross pollination ecosystem where it will help to solve that siloing that we talked about, right? So, as an example, a hot topic right now is like generative AI and chat GPT and all this kind of stuff. So I could easily see right now, a panel could be with like a famous researcher with someone like Ben Gertz, so with someone, who's in the space of media outreach of blockchain technology, like talking about like what is the reality of these technologies. Can this sort of generative AI be useful in any way for biotechnology, etc., and to allow people who are in the attendance to understand, again, with whatever skill set they have, how does that potentially slot into this broader idea of accelerating these technologies that will hopefully save us all from horrific disease. So that's going to be the main change this year, is that this is going to be a longevity research and DeSci cross pollination initiative. And again, we're looking for partners and sponsors and all that kind of stuff. Again, Jelani will talk about this later, of course, but it'd be great to have DeSci World involved, and just ride along all that ecosystem building that we've been talking about for a long time.
Yep, you already know. My DMs are always open. We're already talking about it. So for sure, everybody stay tuned for that. Ed, briefly before we close out, what do you want to say to Keith?
Yes, I tuned in part way, but it was great to hear what Keith's working on. I come from the regenerative ag movement, and we're doing the hopes that I have for DeSci is that we're working on the same things you're working on in regenerative ag. We're working on, what does our food have to do with our health, and why did changes in the food system correspond so much with the increases of these diseases, especially diseases that really weren't heard of in the past. So my hopes is that DeSci, we can all work and learn together on how all people involved in the whole spectrum of health, from the people that grow our food and what we put on our food, is that a factor, and the people that are trying to solve the outcomes or treat the diseases until maybe we can solve these problems, maybe at the roots of the system, which is in our soil and our food. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Ed, for that comment. And actually want to build off of what you just said, because it's very important. And it ties back also to Jelani's comment earlier about making sure that we don't overhype things, right? Because to your point, Ed, right now, the best things that you can do to promote your healthy longevity are still the things that your parents told you to do. Sleep well, try not to stress yourself out, and eat well. And that speaks to your point. And this is one of the key areas that I think decentralized science will help with. And initiatives like CureDAO, if everyone's familiar with CureDAO, is an example of an organization that's looking at things like this, where if you can have everybody contribute their data, their steps data, their potentially their facial biomarkers, voice biomarkers. There's privacy concerns there, but if we can solve those privacy concerns and people are absolutely, on-chain verified that nobody's looking at their data, there's just like machine learning that's being applied to it to tell them something personally on their phone or something. What that will enable, like, you can't change what you can't measure, right? And what this will enable is a comprehensive suite of biomarkers, some of which can be very quote unquote easy, physiological biomarkers, things based on like your walking gait and your face and your voice and things like this. And if you have a cluster of these biomarkers together, you can learn, and you can correlate that with data about like when you slept, what you ate, etc. To your point, Ed, this can really start to tease out like, oh crap, like corn syrup of this type, if I have it at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. is like disastrous for my health personally, right? So I need to change something, right? So if anyone's curious in those kind of angles, maybe talk to Mike Sin from Cured Out, because I know he's passionate about exactly what I just said there. But yeah, like you just mentioned something that teed up an excellent near-term potential value proposition for DeSci, Ed, which is if we can structure our data in the right way and correlate biomarkers in the right way, we can learn things, especially about how food affects us, which can be very, again, it's not going to make you live 200 years old. We have to do more significant engineering for that sort of stuff. But in terms of helping people right now healthily reach what is the maximal life expectancy now, food is extremely important, along with other lifestyle modifications, etc.
Both fantastic points. Thank you both for your insights. Keith, thank you for coming on as a guest. Ed, thank you for always coming on it and bringing up really good points. Guys, this has been a great conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. For those of you who will be listening to the recordings later on, make sure to do follow Keith, follow lifespan.io, contribute where you can, all the other stuff that we talked about previously. And also make sure you take care of yourselves, eat well, exercise, sleep. Don't let yourself get stressed. Take it easy, but still work very hard for the things that you're passionate about. So, that being said, guys, have a great weekend. We will see you next week for another episode of DeSci Rising. Have a great time in between then. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take it easy.